Okay, so in this session, we're going to explore looking at data sets and how we can find appropriate data sets on the Office of National Statistics. And then I'm going to show you how to use that data set to be able to manipulate it to look at things like the average, the max, the min. Again, we're going to maybe look at things like the total, we might look at the mode, cumulative frequency, if it works out as well within this tutorial. So we're going to have a look at how we can manipulate data sets based on accurate sources. So this source obviously is very reliable. We know that it's regulated by the government because it's a .gov website. So we know that the data within this source is relatively credible and up to date. Now, I've just picked the coronavirus because I thought it was quite a topical issue to have a look at some of the data. Now, when you go into the website, obviously, you can have a look around to see what data sets you might want to look at based on the COVID-19. So there's lots of different data sets here that we could perhaps look at. We could look at the deaths registered. So for now, I'm just going to click on this just so that we've got an idea of something. And then you'll see then it comes up with this latest page here. Now, it tells you the main points that are within the source. So there's some data here that perhaps you could use yourself to put into a chart. And then we've got things like tables. Now, usually underneath everything, there is a version here that you can actually download. Now, XLS is the spreadsheet version. So this is the one that we're going to use in a second. But just to show you, there's more secondary sources here. So obviously a secondary source, as we know from the session, is a source that has been collected by somebody else that we want to use. Now, this is quite a good complex secondary source that you could use because it has different data sets on here. It also shows you a range of different time frames within the data. And also you've got different sets of data. So deaths not involving COVID, deaths involving COVID, and then over the top, they plot the 5-year average. So there's a lot of information on here that you could actually use to analyze. So you could compare the values between the deaths not involving COVID and the deaths involving them. You could have a look at different elements and compare that to the average as well and look at whether it's above or below whatever the average was before. So there's lots of different data, and this is what we would class as quite a complex chart that you could gain lots of figures from. So again, there's lots of other things that you can look at here, like deaths registered weekly, monthly. There's also a glossary of terms on here. So it gives you a lot of extra additional information regarding the quality and validity of the data in which has been selected. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to download this spreadsheet so that we can have a look at it. Okay, so we know from previous sessions that spreadsheets are used to store large amounts of data. It helps us to do calculations on the data. We also know that the way that we obviously record our data in the cells and the coordinates, so this, for example, is A4, it tells us here. We also know that if we want to highlight the whole thing, that we click between the A and the 1, and we can do our formatting techniques. So obviously we can make some changes to the data, we can wrap and merge it, we can center the data. If you highlight this and you also wanted to, say, for example, move all of the columns over, you can do that. And then you also wanted to move some of them up to make them look a bit nicer, we can also do that. You can delete by highlighting, right-clicking and deleting, so that we've also got elements. And then if I just zoom out so you can see, some of the data sets look a little bit small. So I'm going to increase my, or decrease I should say, just to fit everything in. Okay, so I'm going to zoom back in just so you can see how we can now make use of some of this. So if I wanted to compare some of the information on here and the data to analyse, say for my individual project or for the topic in which I'm looking at that I wanted to analyse and compare between England and Wales, we can do that quite easily as well. Okay, so one of the things we've got to be really mindful of is creating a chart on data that is really useful. So if I were to just collect or set up a chart based on this data, if I show you, now I've highlighted them all and I've clicked on insert and recommended chart. Quite a lot of these, they're too small in numbers to compare effectively because some are percentages and some are not. So obviously we need to be very careful and mindful as to what it is that we actually need to know about and that we can calculate or analyse the data based on that. When you start then to include data that's irrelevant, then obviously the chart then that I've created here doesn't really make any sense. So it's really important that we make it based on appropriateness of the data. Okay, so what I've done is I've got rid of some of the data that I don't actually need. So in order to then create your chart, depending on what it is that you want, I'm going to highlight the information. I'm going to go to recommended chart for now. I'm just going to select one. Just going to have this one just for now, just to show you. Now you can see that some of the data at the bottom is so small in comparison to this data. Now there's a plus sign here, so you can add labels, so that obviously it makes it easier for people to read, or a table so they can look at the ratio or the difference between the data sets. Now the series here, if you right click and select data, then you can edit the series. So one becomes England, and then my other one becomes Wales. Now, it's really important that you put axes titles as well on there, so you must always label the titles, and you must always label your chart type as well. And what people often do is accidentally, they delete them, just go back to the plus, add it again. Okay. Now, on Spreadsheets Online, you can also find it in the tab at the top. And there's an element called axes, and that allows you to be able to select the axes. So this is just a very basic comparison chart based on data sets.